Hello and welcome into Off the Bench here on a Monday. I'm Reed Mouse. Stone Shields, my producer today, coming after another football game that the Cincinnati Bengals played, and another game that I would say it didn't go well, but it went pretty much the exact way that they've all gone for the past 2 months, and pretty much the great majority of this season. And I know there's other things that are going on in the wide world of sports, but we are going to hone in, as we do every Monday, begrudgingly so, on the Cincinnati Bengals, who are now 3-7. Before we get into all that, we'll welcome you in. As I mentioned, I'm Reed Mouse. It was a good weekend other than the Bengals game. Stone, how was your weekend?
It was good, Reader. Good to be back. Good to be back here on another Monday. Great job, as always, on the watch-along. You left me a couple of French fries over here, which I certainly appreciate there as well.
Sorry about that.
No, but, another tough one for the Cincinnati Bengals. You know, they're kind of hanging in there for a little bit, and then
hanging in there.
You look at the scoreboard, and it's like, that's not good. But,
kind of
plenty to unpack, obviously.
Yeah, they I don't think they never had a lead, never tied up the game after the opening drive, but they did kind of hang in there. They did. All right, let's dive right in. We got a full hour of moaning and complaining and b-wording about the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't even know what I'm allowed to say on this show, so I'll just I said b-word instead of the word that I mean, which you guys all know what that means. But let's start with this. The Bengals are 3-7. And we've tried our best this season to look at the positive light, the optimistic light. We've tried to spin our brain and pull the yarn in a way that makes you think that this Cincinnati Bengals team is something other than what they truly are. And what they truly are is not a good football team. They're not. When Jake Browning was playing, I said this looks like the worst team in the NFL. Because they were. In the 3 games that he started, they were the worst team in the NFL, and it reflected in the score that they played. And they played good teams, tough teams, but it reflected in the way that they played that they were not good and probably the worst team in the league. And then you bring in Joe Flacco, and you get a little bit of hope. You get a little bit of, all right, this looks to be the case, but as we have found, they're still not good. They're probably a step or two above where they were with Jake Browning, but they're still not very good. And the offense looked more on par with where it did early on in the year, and not what we've seen over the last 4 weeks. And we'll talk about the offense and everything like this. But I just want to drive home the point, put a hammer on the head of the nail, and say that everything that we try to do in sports talk, in the media here at Chatterbox Sports, because admittedly, I feel like I've been nothing but negative this year. But if you guys have watched Chatterbox Sports for a while now, you've understood that I am a positive spin guy. I always try to find the positive spin, but I'm running out of ways to do that. I'm running out of ways to get excited. Stone, very positive guy when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals. But we can't, maybe Stone can. I cannot do that anymore. I cannot find the positive spin of maybe this happens or maybe this will fall our way. And the Cincinnati Bengals team finds a way to drive themselves into week 17, 16, 18 at the end of December where we're still playing for something because admittedly it's not going to happen. It was never going to happen with the way that this team is constructed, with the way that this team is coached, and with the way that they evidently play. They had 2 weeks to prepare for the game yesterday, and it was their worst offensive showing since Joe Flacco came on the field, and head-scratching, and we'll get into that too, just head-scratching decisions on the way that they approached playing the Pittsburgh Steelers here in this game, because we saw what was very successful a month ago on Thursday Night Football, and they didn't do that at all. And this team, they turned the ball over, 2 offensive scores, or two defensive scores from the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's now 5 turnovers in the last 2 weeks. And we knew that was going to happen because that's been the MO of Joe Flacco throughout his entire career. And one of them, admittedly, was a fumble from Noah Fant. But the MO of Joe Flacco's entire career is he's going to throw some picks, and we hadn't seen it for the first 3 weeks, and now we're kind of starting to see it come. This team turns the ball over. They don't create turnovers on the defensive side of the ball. They cannot sustain any rhythm against good teams offensively. They cannot tackle. They cannot get the big play when they need it on either side of the ball. Special teams looked good, so we got that going for us. Yippee. Shout out Darren Simmons. Shout out this team. But point blank, the reason that we have seen, despite if Joe comes back or Flacco's playing really well right now, we can get back to 500. We can do all this stuff, and maybe we can play some exciting December football. Despite all that, the reason that when ESPN or Fox Sports or CBS Sports or Bleacher, I don't even know, The Athletic, any of the publications, when they'll put out their power rankings, as they will tomorrow after Monday Night Football tonight, they'll have the Bengals at 27, 28, 26, somewhere in that range, near the bottom of the list, is because this is a bottom of the league football team. They have one of the worst defenses this sport has ever seen, to a point where we are talking proudly about how the defense showed some stuff yesterday, and the team still gave up 20 points. The defense still gave up 20 points to Mason Rudolph for a half. To where Mason Rudolph, on average, looked downfield 3 yards and diced up this team for a couple of drives. To where on the offensive side of the ball, we are now unable to score more than 12 points against a defense that is admittedly a pretty good defense, the Pittsburgh Steelers, but we are unable to score more than 12 points against them when we just put up 30-plus a few weeks ago. When we have players like Jamar Chase, and we'll get into Jamar Chase later, and Tee Higgins that just weren't a part of the game plan at all. When we have Chase Brown having a pretty nice game. And it's just point blank, this team came into the season with aspirations lower than where they've been in years past, admittedly. Aspirations lower than because going into last year, we were told, they just came off, they're 9-8. They didn't have Joe Burrow for most of the season, and then they played the hardest schedule in NFL history. Like, this team still's viable in the AFC, and this year, we were just looking at them going, this team can make the postseason, and this team, if they make the postseason, can make some noise. And here we are, and we have watched an embarrassing performance in 7 of the 8 weeks since Joe Burrow. And really, they played 10 games. They've played well once. They've won 3 of them. They've played well, maybe well twice if you count the Jags game. But in every loss, they've been absolutely embarrassing. There was no, we played well and we played tough. No, it's been every single loss has been embarrassing in admittedly its own way. That's what's crazy. It's not the same loss every single week that you can come accustomed to it. It is a new way to be embarrassed about this team for 8 straight weeks. And today it's because they lost 34-12 when Mason Rudolph played a half for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We got players spitting in the faces of opponents. And I don't care that it's a rival. I don't care that it's Jalen Ramsey, who, is a rebel-rouser in his own right. It is embarrassing to me as a fan. And this clip went viral yesterday. Or it's not, I wouldn't call it viral, but it's got some traction from our Chatterbox account where I'm just lamenting at the end of the game that we do this for fun. We as Bengals fans, you guys tuning into this program are doing it to detract from the real world, whether it be, for an hour, hey, I don't have to think about my job or, in the background noise while I do my job or, while I'm doing these things for my family. Whatever it is, this is supposed to be the enjoyable part. This is supposed to be how we pass the time of life and do it in enjoyment. And we are choosing to do it with a team that with one of the greatest wide receivers in the history of the game and one of the best quarterbacks currently in the game have shown ways to completely fail us, and embarrass us in this city, which, by the way, isn't like we are a hallmark city for athletic success anymore. Used to be that way in this town, but not anymore. To where, what's the Bungles? The Bungles are back. Put the trash bags over your head. That's where I'm just frustrated as a fan, is because I just, you sit and you wonder, and you go, why am I doing this? Why am I wasting my time doing this? As a fan, why am I devoting my energy? Why am I devoting the money that I work so hard to make? Why don't I, as the kids say, go touch grass, go outside, go spend it with my dogs and my wife or my family? Why don't I do that instead? But instead, no, I'll show up on some of you guys will go down to Acrisure Stadium where they're 7-point underdogs against one of the best teams in the AFC this Sunday against the New England Patriots. And, by Friday, I'll completely change my brain around to go, oh, we're going to win. I think we can win this thing. And we win this thing. Oh, we'll go on to Thursday Night Football, Thanksgiving again. And maybe Joe will be back and maybe we'll beat and we'll do it all over again. And then we know, inevitably, they'll let us down. But we'll do it all over again. Stone, you're more. I never thought I'd meet a more optimistic fan than me because he laughs at that because I've been nothing but negative since hosting this show. But I truly am. Always try to find the light spot. You're more optimistic than I am. Help me understand. Try to push me in. If you can't do it, you can't do it. But try to push me into believing this team is anything other than a bottom-of-the-tier franchise in the NFL.
Yeah, you can't do that, unfortunately. We kind of I came to terms with reality. I think you did as well. Like, we understood the Bear game. You needed to win that game. You needed to go 2-1 in the final 3 going into the bye. You beat Pittsburgh the first time, and then you had 2 golden opportunities there to keep your season alive. And Zach, they were talking about this on the broadcast. Zach, telling the team, showing the standings before the game, like, yo, we're right back in this thing if we win. I think us here at Chatterbox, we kind of were like, maybe they can find a way, but it kind of felt like it was done as far as the playoffs go after the Bear game. So then you kind of just – obviously it's very disappointing that you lose the game. But, yeah, at this point, you're definitely a bottom feeder in the NFL. It's just the reality of the situation here. And Ted Karras talked about it after the game. They haven't put together a complete football game. And when you can't do that and, when you can't overcome when bad things happen to you, right? When you watch the Bengals, it just feels like everything needs to be borderline perfect.
Correct.
In order for them to come out on top. And that's just not a sustainable way to try to have success in this league. And then when you couple it with not being able to force any turnovers on defense, you don't want to be over-reliant on that, but they haven't forced one in 3 games. So you're going to be in a really tough spot. And, they got a lot of work to do this offseason, and I don't think you can sit there and argue that they're a top 20 franchise right now. They're just not. They're a bottom feeder.
Yeah, no, that's what they've been my entire life, and that's where they'll probably continue to be. Here's the thing, and you eloquently made this point, is that it feels like when you're watching this team, everything needs to go right, which is, if there's any true sign of how bad your team is, it's that when everything has to go right is how you win games. That's what bad teams are. The Kansas City Chiefs can roll up and, Patrick Mahomes isn't playing well. They can't run the ball. Their defense gives up 30, and they'll still find a way to win. Before we went on the air, Stone goes, man, if we wouldn't have thrown that pick 6, maybe this game looks – and he's right. If Joe Flacco doesn't throw that pick 6, we might win that game, and maybe we do. But that's what we've done here in Cincinnati is, okay, well, if we don't throw the pick 6, maybe this game's differently. The Bears and the The Jets game is, if we have Trey Hendrickson for that game, then he probably closed the game out and we win. Oh, well, what if we had Joe Flacco instead of Jake Browning playing the first 3 games and they would have made a different starter? What if we didn't have the fumbles against the Vikings game? Is that how it changes? And it just goes down the line. And it's always some excuse. That's what bad teams do. They make excuses for not winning the game. You know what good teams do? They just win the game. We make fun of Mike Tomlin here on this program. We do it in this city. I hate the Pittsburgh Steelers more than I hate any other franchise in the history of sport. But you got to give credit where it's due. We can make fun of the 9-8 every single year. That's dang impressive. And you know why they do it? It's because they're a good franchise and they believe that they're going to win games. And they don't need to score 40 points and have things go their way and the dominoes fall in line. They just go out and they win the game more often than not, which is why we're always looking up at Big Brother Pittsburgh Steelers. Because they do that, we do not. The Ravens do that, we do not. And this is the point I want to make about this franchise as a whole. The NFL, the reason it is king, other than the fact that it is somehow ingrained into our consciousness as human beings, especially here in America, that we like violence and we want to see the greatest athletes play against. Besides all that, one of the true hallmarks of this sport and why it's captivated the world's or this country's imagination in a way that no other sport has is because of the parity of the league. They have dang near perfected the way in which all it takes is one good offseason of a good draft and getting the right player, getting a new coach to turn the things around, and you once again are viable. You are competitive. That being said, every generation, once in a generation, your team will have an opportunity, the bad teams will, to change the trajectory of their franchise. The Kansas City Chiefs have been run well for a while, but they weren't a premier franchise, even with Andy Reid, until Patrick Mahomes gets there and they start winning. The Green Bay Packers have been a successful franchise since Bart Starr, but they had some lean years, and then Brett Favre comes around, and once again, they're at the top of the things. The Steelers are always winning. The 49ers needed Joe Montana. Every once in a while, your team gets an opportunity to dig itself out of the hole, whatever the hole it may be, and put its team in the limelight. And when that opportunity comes, you better be ready for it. And the Cincinnati Bengals number was called in 2020 when they get Joe Burrow and they draft Tee Higgins. And the next year, they draft Jamar Chase. And their number comes and everything's right for 2 years. And they look like this team not only is one of the best teams in the NFL, but they're going to have a long line of success. Multiple playoff runs, multiple road victories, maybe a couple trips to the Super Bowl. Hopefully you win that Super Bowl. And the Bengals organization, the way that they're run from Mike Brown to the bottom, with Duke Tobin for a long time, with Marvin Lewis, and now with Zach Taylor. This team was joked about the way it's run, cheap, secular, insular, insular. And their number was called to take that next step and to move into this new era of Cincinnati Bengals football. No longer the Bungles. This team's going to be right. This team's going to be a competitor. And this team's going to be on the national stage year in and year out. And point blank, they were not ready. They did not have the infrastructure in place. They did not have the right coach. They did not have the right player personnel director, the de facto general manager. They weren't ready for the limelight. And now we are sitting here as the cracks in the foundation are starting to show and we think this thing's going to tumble on top of itself. We are sitting here wondering, is it too late to right the ship? Is it too late to get this team right to, we still have that little shine. Its name is Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. We still have that. Can we take advantage of it? And unfortunately, it's looking more and more evident that that's not the case. Unfortunately, it looks like the Cincinnati Bengals, their time, their number was called, they stepped up to the microphone, and they forgot the words to the song. They got in a stage box, and they just weren't ready. And I don't know where we go from there. I know where we're going to continue to go, which is probably having Duke Tobin continue to be the director of player personnel and Zach Taylor be the head coach, and we're crossing our fingers that Joe Burrow's healthy, and maybe if we just hit one draft pick just falls in our lap, because it looks like we're going to have an early draft pick, maybe one just fall in our lap as the way that Joe Burrow did and Jamar Chase did. We'll be right. And this is what I want to talk about, because it's almost a running joke at this point. Every one of our thumbnails, every time that I sit in front of a microphone, I'm sitting here calling for Zach Taylor's job, and I'll make this point a billion times. I'll make it a billion more times, because you guess what? I'm going to continue to say it. And I don't understand how he can continue to keep his job when he's been embarrassed in 7 of 8 weeks. There's no line of work that I can do that, where I can see if I showed up and for a year and a half consecutively was just completely inept at my job, or whatever my responsibilities were completely inept, then I wouldn't have a job anymore. And that's where Zach Taylor is. But the one thing, even the naysayers, even when Joe Burrow was and the Bengals were going to the Super Bowl and the AFC Championship, people were like, I don't like Zach Taylor's play call, or I don't like the way that we're drafting. The one thing that we pretty much unanimously agreed on was, it's pretty clear that they've got a good culture. It's pretty clear that they've got each other's back, that they don't have a whole lot of penalties, that they don't say a whole lot of things in front of the mic. They don't play kind of the way that the Steelers have played for 2 decades, and that's dirty or whatever. And here we are. In the last few weeks, the Bengals have had more penalties than they've had ever in the Zach Taylor era. The last game they played, one of their big free agent signings over the past few years, gets a penalty for choking out another player after the play. And here we go. One of the hallmarks, the pillars of this organization going forward is spitting in another player's face. Does that sound like a good culture? Doesn't sound like it to me. It doesn't sound like this is a tight-knit team. It sounds like the threads are unraveling. It sounds like everything's spiraling. Because everything is. It doesn't sound like it. It looks like it too. Everything is spiraling. Everything is unraveling. The one thing that the Zach Taylor supporters, who I had been for 5 years. I got laughed at on this show a couple years ago when Tom was hosting, and I was sitting over on the sideline with Elliot. And Tom asked the question, would you rather have Zach Taylor or Bill Belichick be the head coach of this team? And I said, at this point in time, I'd pick Zach Taylor. Now, that's still probably true, but they laughed at me for that day. That was 3 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever it was. So I've been the supporter of Zach. And the one thing that I've always said is, hey, this team, they don't have penalties. They say the right things at the podium. They've got each other's back. Even after the Jaguars game earlier this year, I said, this team's fight. They don't give in. They don't give up. Last year, they were 4-8. They finished 9-8. A couple years ago, Joe Burrow goes down at 5-3, and the team still finishes despite playing a really tough schedule at 9-8. I'm going, hey, this team fights. This team's going there. But it's pretty evident if cracks are getting in my fandom of the last seven embarrassments in 8 weeks, it's clearly happening in the locker room. And they've ran out. They've ran out of Uno reverse cards. They've ran out of trump cards. In the facet of, okay, things start spiraling out of control here with Jake Brown. We'll go get Joe Flacco. Well, once again, be on the right way. They have 2 embarrassing losses at home against the New York Jets, the worst team in the league. And then they get the onside recovery and take the lead against the Chicago Bears. Then Colston Loveland goes for 60 yards. And that's embarrassing. And they're like, all right, well, things are down again. Oh, Joe Burrow's coming back. He's coming back early. He wants to play. Thanksgiving. That's when he wants to play. 3 weeks ahead of when you guys thought he was going to play. He's back. And then once again, you're like, okay, this team's back. We can do this. We're on board once again. 34-12. The offense was worth negative 2 points yesterday because they gave up 2 touchdowns and they scored 12. They were worth negative 2 points. That offense that was ballyhooed for the last few weeks. That we continue to say this team, anything can happen with this offense. Stone, I am losing it up here. I am losing it up here. Am I losing it? Would I say that between the penalties, between the after-play actions of Orlando Brown and Jamar Chase, between all those things, it feels like the one calling card of the Zach Taylor era, which was he's got this great culture. It feels like we can no longer say that. Am I going too far? Am I losing it too far when I say that?
I don't think so. I mean, we're going to find out. There's still a lot of us are sitting here and we want the season to be over and it feels like it's almost over. It's not. There's a long way to go. So they're going to keep lining it up there on Sundays and playing football games. And, we're going to have a real conversation at the end of the year, depending on how this team performs. Like, obviously, there's nothing really to play for at this point from a playoff perspective, but there's lots of jobs on the line. There's lots of livelihoods on the line. And it'll be interesting to see how this team responds through that. If the team quits on Zach, that obviously is a massive issue, and there probably needs to be a change made. But I don't think it would be fair to say they've quit on him yet. I didn't really see quit. I will say with the Duggar pick six, I understand the Jamar Spitting's getting all kind of the headlines right now, but I'm ticked at Jamar for not making the tackle on Kyle Duggar. I mean, he was kind of lollygag. He was down there, but he had an opportunity to make a play at like the 5-yard line. He kind of just olayed him into the end zone. And I don't know if Tee Higgins necessarily was running after him very hard there on that play. So that's kind of one of my biggest takeaways from the game is you're in a spot there where, mind you, and we talked about this earlier in the show about, it's always the what-if game with Cincinnati. Well, if this didn't happen, they would have been all right. They were down 4. Had the ball in Steeler territory. Right. We're just about in field goal range. If you get half there on that third down, you feel like McPherson's going to make it a 1-point game. You throw the pick six, feels like it's kind of over, just kind of the way the game was going. But if you can make a play there at like the 5-yard line, or if T shows a little bit more hustle, runs down there, tracks down Duggar, you have an opportunity with a defense that, was playing better than they had the past few weeks to potentially make a stop and keep it to 3, and then you feel like you have a little bit of life there. But once you have it, it was, the waning seconds of the third quarter. Once he runs it in, then you look at the scoreboard, you're like, we just can't overcome that.
Yeah, it's too much, and especially when the offense was never able to find its rhythm. All right, let's dive into this. So the big story after the Bengals lost is video comes out. So Jalen Ramsey gets ejected for punching Jamar Chase. Gets ejected for that. Penalty. It actually progresses our drive. Progresses the Bengals drive and because it looks like they were about to punt the ball on 4th and 1. Regardless, it progresses the drive. Then it comes out that Jalen Ramsey says Jamar Chase spit on him. Okay. Jamar Chase denies it. Video comes out that, Jamar Chase spit on Jalen Ramsey. I've got an opinion on this. Stone, what's your take on the antics of Jamar Chase yesterday, spitting on Jalen Ramsey?
Yeah, it's not good, obviously. When you have a grown man spitting on another grown man, that's not something you want to happen, right? This happened earlier in the year, obviously, with Jalen Carter and the Dallas Cowboys. Right. It was like a $57,000 fine, and they were going to suspend him for a game, and then they looked back at it, and they said, well, we tossed him really before the Cowboy game began, so that counts as his 1-game suspension. It'll be interesting to see how they handle it with Jamar Chase because, obviously, that was at, the very beginning of the fourth quarter. I don't think I would be surprised at all if he misses the Patriots game. I think the fine will be similar to that, maybe even more, upwards of $60,000 for that. And, it's just unfortunate because you wanted to see some feistiness. You wanted to see somebody stand up for the team and show some fight. You would have liked to see it come in a different way than spitting on another guy, right? And I think, it's unfortunate, and it's kind of a reflection of where the team's at right now here at this point. And one thing I have noticed is people were like, well, that's the most disrespectful thing you can do to another man. It is. That was kind of the intent there from Jamar Chase. Like, he's got no love towards the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's got no love at all towards Jalen Ramsey, and he clearly was frustrated with how things had transpired in the game before that, and he did it. And who knows if he regrets it. He should, right? But, it's not great. I don't think it's, some people are like, oh, you need to suspend him for weeks. This is ridiculous. Like, it's bad and it's embarrassing and it's gross. But like I said earlier, I'm a little bit more upset with him not tracking down Kyle Duggar and making a play. So, it's Bengals Steelers. It gets really ugly. It's part of it. There's not really many situations in NFL history of people getting caught for spitting. Jay Morrison was talking about this on his podcast after the game. Like, besides the Carter thing, you got to go back to like 2006 when something happened like this with T.O., but obviously this day and age, more cameras, all that kind of stuff. But in between the lines, weird stuff happens, nasty stuff happens. He got caught for it. It'll be interesting to see how he handles it when the Cincinnati media asks him about it, because obviously he lied about it and said he didn't spit. Now, what's he going to say? Is he going to continue to live in denial, which you and I were talking off the air? Obviously, that wouldn't be very wise. Or is he just going to say, I have no comment? Or is he going to come out and apologize? I think I would be shocked about that. But it's not great, obviously, that he went out there and did it. But there's no love here between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals. I would have liked to see it come in a different way. Somebody showing, some disrespect or some fight towards Pittsburgh. It came via spitting, which is gross, but we'll see. I think I expect him probably to be suspended for the Pats game.
I'd be shocked if he isn't suspended. I'd be truly, truly shocked if he isn't suspended. And I don't want to put words in your mouth here, Stone, but one thing you said there was, it is the most disrespectful thing a man can do. And it's up there. It's on the short list of sins that you can do to another man, especially on the field of competition. And it might be the worst. And then you back that up by saying, well, what do you like? That's what happens in the heat of the battle between these two rivals. Yeah, that was his intent, was to be overly disrespectful. And to me, that's not good. It's not good enough. There is nothing, and I repeat, nothing that can ever excuse that kind of an action on the field. He was doing it on purpose to goad Jalen Ramsey into getting a penalty, which they got, and which the Bengals didn't even really take advantage of because they ended up losing the game by 22. There is nothing that can ever excuse that. We're talking about one of the most heated rivalries in the league. Back in the Marvin Lewis era, you can go back to that 2015 playoff game. Tez and Pac-Man Jones. And there's no love lost between these two organizations. No doubt about it. They're at least the most hated franchise I've seen, most hated sports team that I've ever encountered. It makes me sick when someone tells me that they're a Steelers fan. Heck, my sister married a Steelers fan, and she was like my best friend. I can't forgive her for that one. But there is nothing that can excuse that. You simply cannot act that way on the field. I don't care if it's a rival. I don't care if you're trying to goad them in. And I'm cool. Like, if you want to try and have them make mistakes, it's fine. But you don't draw them into by disrespecting another man like that. And this is where I'm talking when it comes to Zach Taylor, that this kind of action can happen on his team. To where 2 weeks ago, Orlando Brown's choking out a player after the play. To where this week, we've got a player spitting in the face of an opponent. This is an ugly, ugly game. It is the modern-day gladiators. Every play is a car crash. But we've got to have some civility out there. And there are lines in this sport. There are lines in sport, and you don't cross it. And Jamar Chase crossed it, point blank. And do I think he's going to apologize for it? No. Do I think it's embarrassing that he denied it? Clearly trying to get away with it. And listen, I try to get away with stuff all the time. I try to get away with stuff all the time. Then you find out, and then they show the evidence. Like, all right, then you own up to it. I don't know if he'll own up to it. If he comes out and says, I still didn't do it, I mean, that's just lunacy. That's just crazy. He won't do that. But this team on a surmounting list of ways that as a guy that wears stripes every Sunday, that's embarrassing. It's an embarrassing look for the organization that we have a player acting like that. Even against the biggest rival. Even against a guy like Jalen Ramsey, who's no saint. You just don't do that. You don't do that. Point blank, end of story. You do not play like that. And the fact that that is okay to be dealt with, that is okay to play like that in Zach Taylor's locker room is another indictment on him. Jamar Chase ain't going anywhere unless he has to go anywhere. So it's just you suspend him, whether it be an internal suspension or coming from the NFL. Because that cannot happen. And I'm intrigued. I'm interested to see what Zach Taylor says about the incident today. Because he's going to be asked about it. And he's probably going to say something. He's like, well, we're dealing with that internally. And you know, that's just not how we whatever it is. He's going to say an okay thing. He's not going to say anything bad. And he's not going to outwardly blast Jamar either. But maybe it is time to do that. Maybe it is time to step the point and go, this is not how we conduct ourselves here in the Bengals. And you can do that privately or you can do it publicly. But this team, this whole thing, this whole organization, they weren't ready for what was bestowed upon them 4 years ago. And it's been downhill ever since the initial boom. It's been downhill. Super Bowl, AFC Championship, 9-8, heading down to a top 10 pick in the league. And it just cannot. It cannot happen, man. It cannot happen. If there was, I don't know. You simply cannot spit in another man's face on the field. There's got to be some civility out there. Orlando Brown choking a guy. Cannot happen. This team that once never had penalties. This team that once never acted like that, had a good culture, just played the game, played it hard, and won the games. Now things are just going week after week. It's getting worse and worse. Be interested to see what happens with Jamar Chase. And here we go. In the final 20 minutes of the show, a few things I want to get into. The Bengals are now 3-7 after starting 2-0. The talk had been for years that this team starts slow because they have. They simply have. After the Super Bowl year, they started 0-2. 2023, they started 1-3. I think last year they started 1-4. This year they start 2-0. They get the good start. They add a little buffer for their season, which we needed. We knew we needed because that slow start is what kept the Bengals out of the postseason the last 2 years. The most cynical fans, media members, the ones that always go, well, it's the Bengals. It's all gonna crumble. Those guys, the most cynical Bengals fans, Bengals, Cincinnati media members, national media members, couldn't have predicted that after starting 2-0 and with Joe Burrow going down, that 8 weeks later, this team would be 3-7. Even them would say, 4-6. And then they go 2-6 over the next 8. They go 3-5 to where they're 5-5. The most negative Bengals fans would have said that. We are living in a reality. We are living in a season that has spiraled away from the imaginations of the most cynical Bengals fans and media members. And that's why I've now, for 4 weeks, for 45 minutes into this show, I've continued to call for something that won't happen, which is for Zach Taylor or Duke Tobin to get fired. Because we are living in the worst reality. The worst season imaginable. 3-7, losing to the Jets. Losing by 22 to Mason Rudolph. The Bengals, before Mason Rudolph took a snap yesterday, the Bengals were down by a point. It was 9-10. They just kicked a field goal on the opening drive of the second half, and out comes Mason Rudolph. Aaron Rodgers isn't coming back. And how does the game end? How does it end? The Steelers score 24, we score 3, 34-12. 2 offensive or defensive scores for the Steelers. Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins, not a part of the game at all. And let's dive into that. Thursday Night Football a month ago. Joe Flacco, second start of the Cincinnati Bengals. How did we win that game? You look at one of the best players in the league. One of the best players to ever play the position, and who I think, if he plays his entire career here in Cincinnati, and I know I just got on him for spitting on another human being because it's grotesque. If he plays his entire career with the Cincinnati Bengals, he will go down as the best Bengal of all time. The only person that he'd probably have to overcome is Anthony Munoz, who's often regarded as the greatest lineman ever. So it's one of them two. You got him the ball 16 times. And I don't have the exact stats, but he had, 4 catches, 10 targets? And a lot of the targets were just deep balls. But he was not a part of the game plan with a banged-up Joe Flacco who clearly was hurt. Clearly was hurt. And you read, how do you get him a part of it? It's the same way that you have now for the last few weeks. Quick snap, throw it over to Jamar. Doesn't even need to be a screen pass. Just a quick give it to him. He's got to make one man miss and see what happens. He's one of the best players with the ball in his hand. Sweeps, end arounds, whatever it is, you get the ball in Uno's hand as many times as you possibly can because he's the best. He was the best player on the field yesterday. You tell the NFL, you can pick any player that played yesterday. Tell the rest of the GMs, pick any player on the field. The majority of them will take Jamar Chase. Maybe some will take TJ Watt. He's the best player on the field. And he's just not a part of the game plan. That's how we come out of a 2-week break. That's how we prepare for a rivalry game with the season on the line, is not getting the ball in Jamar Chase's hands when you've got a banged-up quarterback. And I'm sure the Steelers, embarrassed by how they played a month ago at Acrisure Stadium, said we're not going to allow Jamar Chase to get 16 catches. But that's when you do those gadget plays that I talked about, the screens, the end arounds. To have them not be a part of this offense is simply asinine. And then on Tee Higgins, too. I know Tee Higgins had the touchdown catch. But every time Joe Flacco dropped back to pass, he was throwing it to, we'll just check it down to Chase Brown. We'll throw it to Andre Yoshivas. Oh, here's a play to Noah Fant. I just don't comprehend on a team that has been playing as well as it has for the last 4 weeks how you don't go out there with a similar game plan. How you don't go out there and say, all right, Joe Flacco's a little hurt. Let's get the ball to Jamar. Let's not ask him to stretch the ball downfield as often. Let's get the ball to T. Instead, they just weren't a part of the game. The offense that we've now for 4 weeks said, if we keep these teams under 30 points, I like our shots. I like our chances. If I would have told you after that opening drive, which that opening drive from the defensive side was the most embarrassing drive I've seen in maybe the history of being a Cincinnati Bengals fan. After that opening drive, if I would have told you at halftime the Steelers will have 10 points. And coming into the second half, Mason Rudolph will play the rest of the game. Every single one of you guys, including myself, every single Bengals fan, every person in the world that's ever watched a second of football will say, yep, we'll take it. And we'll win the game. Thank you very much. We'll be 4-6 and going in a home game against the New England Patriots. Maybe make this season interesting again. And instead, we lose 34-12. How does Zach Taylor not have a better game plan offensively? how do you let this Steelers team completely dictate how we played the game? Because that was the biggest takeaway that I had. The game was ugly. It was an ugly game. And a month ago, when we played on Thursday Night Football, we brought the Steelers into Acrisure Stadium. We asked them to play our game, and we won. We're going to throw the ball around. You're going to throw the ball around. It's going to be 33-32, whatever the final score was, 33-30. And we'll win. We'll beat you that way. And we go into Acrisure Stadium in beautiful Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we play the Pittsburgh Steelers game, and we get bludgeoned for it. Stone, did you have any? You and I are on the same page when it comes most often about Zach Taylor's play calling. I think it's the most trite thing that you can complain about Zach Taylor. But I thought it was completely inept the way that Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins weren't a part of the game yesterday. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of people saying, oh, Joe Flacco was terrible in this game. That's a stretch. Was this his worst game as a Cincinnati Bengal? Yes, obviously. But I wouldn't say he was terrible in this game. I think another thing, again, might sound like another excuse, win definitely was a factor in this game. Win absolutely was a factor. It was a factor when Aaron Rodgers was out there in the first half there as well. So I think my biggest takeaway probably is that you knew these teams played a few weeks ago, and you knew these teams were going to make adjustments coming into this week. And, we always talk about with Zach Taylor, obviously I've defended him for a long time, but typically when you go into a game with this Bengals staff, you go, okay, we're going to get outcoached in this game. Like, unfortunately, that's kind of what it feels like oftentimes for this team. And that was my biggest takeaway, is Pittsburgh did a better job of making adjustments going into this game and learning from what went wrong for them a couple of weeks ago at Acrisure Stadium on Thursday Night Football. And the Bengals didn't do enough right. I would have liked to see a little bit more quick game stuff with, Joe Flacco getting the ball out of his hands quickly and getting it into Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase in space. They weren't able to do that. They didn't really have an opportunity to take many shots down the field. I think there was one, and Joe Flacco missed. Again, does that happen if it's, perfect ideal weather? But when it comes to playoff football, you don't get perfect ideal weather. I definitely think the shoulder was still bugging him. Obviously, he would never say that, but you look at this game, and Pittsburgh made more adjustments than Cincinnati, and they were better prepared in the game than Cincinnati was, and that's ultimately what led them to victory in this game. So, from a play call perspective, I'm curious to get your opinion on the 2-point try. I don't have an issue with them going for two, but the snapping it to the running back, and then I don't know on that play. Again, I'm not I've never been in these meetings. I'm not an X's and O's guy, but typically in that situation, you see that play run around the league. The running back, there's an option to throw it to the quarterback, and nobody was covering Joe Flacco. Interesting to know if that maybe was an option that he had, or if they were just going to run it up the middle the whole time. But I think after the penalty, I don't have an issue. You move the ball great there on that first drive. Don't have an issue going for two there in that spot. I think the analytics would say to do it. I'm not always big analytic guy.
No, you go for two 100% of the time in that position. I just the play call there, I defended it initially because I was like, it's just a wildcat play, it didn't work. But then you start thinking about it more, which, by the way, side tangent here. Why you guys know more about football than I do. You guys, please educate me. I want to learn. I understand. This is what I understand about 2-point conversion plays. It's a small field. It's the hardest point to gain yards on the field because everyone's packed together, right? There's not a whole lot of room to play with. Safeties are right there. Linebackers right there. There's more guys on the line. All of that. I will never understand why 2-point conversions are always gadget plays. I will never understand why it's always a Philly special or a reverse or a wildcat or whatever you got. Like, I will never understand that, why it can't just be your normal goal line play. Like, it's got to always be some craziness. It's always got to be something that you don't run regularly. So initially I didn't hammer the wildcat call because it's familiar with the 2-point conversion plays. That's what you do. And think about it. The positive thing of a wildcat play is you get an extra hat on a hat. You get an extra blocker. We had no lead blocker for Chase Brown. There was no one clearing out that hole for Chase Brown. You're just taking it, and hopefully the offensive line was going to do their part. And, yeah, you're right. There's often an option to go like, all right, if that's not there, we'll check to see if someone's over top of Joe Flacco. Just dump it into the end zone for him if no one's going to be there. Didn't get that. But you go for that 2-point conversion every single time. It stinks that was a chance to tie up the game. They are already tied up the game with the PAT, and they never once again tied up the game. And it was just the entire game. It felt like we were always behind because we were always behind. We were always chasing the 8 ball there. But throughout that game, man, I know Flacco said he was okay and it wasn't that big of a factor. He clearly was off.
Yeah.
And here's what I want to say about Joe Flacco. What he's done in Cincinnati since he's come here, he's been fantastic. Really has. Better than I could have imagined. I do think that what we saw yesterday against the Pittsburgh Steelers is closer to the Joe Flacco of what he is. Like, he's going to play at least one more game, maybe 2 more games. What we saw yesterday is closer to the Joe Flacco that we're going to get going forward than what we saw against the Chicago Bears and the New York Jets. I believe that to be true because that's what he's shown throughout pretty much his entire career. Even go back to that miracle run 2 years ago with the Cleveland Browns where he threw like 9 picks in 4 games. Yeah, he was throwing for 400 yards, 380 yards, whatever it was, but he was throwing multiple picks a game. He's taking shots, and he was just having bad turnover-worthy plays. And the pick 6 was a terrible turnover-worthy play. Never saw Duggar. So I do believe that Joe Flacco, that's closer to the mean of what we're going to get from him going forward for however long that we're going to get for him. And we're not going to do the should Joe Burrow play today. We're not going to do that because we've done that 17 times. We'll do it a dozen more here on this show. But yeah, I look at this team from top to bottom, from the coach, the ownership, the director of player personnel. I can't believe I have to say that instead of just general manager. The DC, the quarterback, the line, the free agent signings, the draft picks. And my takeaway from the Cincinnati Bengals team, my takeaway from the Cincinnati Bengals season, my takeaway from yesterday's game is that this team is not very good. And even with a healthy Joe Burrow throughout this season, this team at best is fighting for a wild card spot. And at best is fighting to stay 500. Though I fear that even with a healthy Joe Burrow, this team wouldn't be close to 500. This team would be 4-6 or 5-5. And that's not good enough when you have that elite of a player. I said this earlier, once in a generation, a team gets an opportunity in this sport because of how fair it is to change the course of its history. The Bengals had that opportunity. And it felt like we were shedding the former the Bungle-ness. It felt like we were shedding the 1990s Bengals, the Marvin Lewis's Bengals, the entire Mike Brown era of Bengals. And we were heading to a new trajectory, a forward thinking. We've got an offensive head coach. We're proactive in the draft. We're taking guys that grade very well. And we just weren't ready for it. We didn't have the infrastructure for it. And this team, under its current head coach, had been defined by, above all else, a culture of these guys like to play for Zach. They want to play for Zach. They like playing with Joe. They're tight-knit here, and they understand what this franchise is building. And it's abundantly clear now that wasn't a device, that wasn't a precipitation of the head coaching of Zach Taylor, but just a precipitation of they were just winning games, and it was the era of good feelings here in Cincinnati. It was the Gilded Age here in Cincinnati. Everything was shiny and gold. And now when things start to unravel, when you miss on several classes, not picks, but classes of drafts. When you 2 years ago had 2 third-round picks, those are supposed to be starters on your teams, and neither one of them can dress for the roster, a 3-7 roster at that. When Shamar Stewart looks to be one of the worst picks I've ever seen, when Barrett Carter is getting bullied, when he's playing the most badass position in the world of sports, linebacker in the NFL, and he's just getting bullied. And he's the worst graded linebacker in the league. That the culture that we thought this organization once had isn't there. It's unraveling. We have Orlando Brown choking out players. We have Jamar Chase, a leader on this team, spitting on opponents. It's all unraveling before our eyes. And I will be incredibly shocked. I will be stunned if they can get this thing back on the tracks, if they can just get this thing upright. It doesn't need to be moving. The engine, throw some coal in the engine room. It doesn't even need to start moving. I would just be surprised if it's not completely derailed. Because that's where we're headed. In fact, I'd argue maybe we're already there. We're already there. We'll see what happens. Because Joe Burrow's going to come back in a few weeks, much to the chagrin of guys like me that thinks that there's no reason for that to happen. He's going to play. He is going to play. And last year they were 4-8. Last year they were 4-8, and they won their last 5 games to finish out the season 9-8. And we're on the precipice. If one thing went their way on that final week, if the Chiefs don't completely give up on that final week, they would have been in the postseason. Maybe there's some luck because this team does play well in December. They have every year under Zach Taylor. Every year, there's some great memory. That first year in 2020 when Ryan Finley beats the 11-2 Pittsburgh Steelers. And in 2021, they beat the Chiefs and win all those games in December and go to the Super Bowl. And then they don't lose a game in 2022, or Jake Browning in 2023 is beating the Jacksonville Jaguars on primetime football. And the Minnesota game with Jake Browning. And then last year, they win every game in December. So they have showed us that they can play here in December, but I'm just telling you, there's nothing that I'm seeing from this team that makes me think that they will get there. Because they need everything to go their way to win football games. They need everything to go their way. They need turnovers, and they need 35 points, and they need great special teams play, and they need some bad penalties from the opponents. And it's just too tall of a task to ask that week in and week out. You got to be mighty lucky, bloody lucky, to get that week in and week out. And they're just not getting that. Stone, have a great show. Thank you so much for being here. Maybe you'll shed a little more light. Maybe it won't be as gloomy on the Stone Shield show as it was here on the off the bench. Guys, thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow. Stone Shield show coming right up.
All right, here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show. We are here on a Monday. Appreciate everybody hanging out through Off the Bench into our show. Plenty of stuff to discuss on the program here today. Bengals lose again as their season is, I think it's safe to say, the Bengals season is over, at least from a postseason playoff competitive standpoint. Obviously, lots still to play for jobs that people are fighting for, coaches and players alike. But as far as any aspirations of getting into the postseason, I think we certainly can write that off. We felt like the Bear game was a must-win. You didn't win. I know, obviously, the team still had some hope going into this Steeler game. Obviously, they documented on the broadcast. Zach Taylor sat him down, had the standings up on the board, and was basically like, hey, we have an opportunity here if we can somehow win this game. But unfortunately, once again, the Cincinnati Bengals unable to play a complementary style of football, and it results in them losing this game. Obviously, the score, 34-12, right? I don't think, how the game exactly played out is indicative of the score. People, of course, laugh at Zach Taylor when he says that after the game, but he's right? You gave up 2 touchdowns when you had the ball on offense. So your defense, still issues all across your defense, but it's very clearly played better in this game defensively than you did against the Jets and the Bears, but obviously still far from good, still far from average, and still obviously not close enough to get a victory. But we'll unpack the game. From start to finish. Obviously, lots of big points in the game. No turnovers for the Bengals. Again, 3 games in a row defensively. They haven't been able to force a turnover. And when you have a bad football team, you need to be really reliant on creating some turnovers to establish a little bit of momentum, steal a couple of possessions, and unfortunately for Cincinnati, haven't been able to do that these couple of weeks here, these past few losses for the Cincinnati Bengals. But lots to unpack with the game. We'll talk Joe Flacco. We'll talk the defense. We'll talk Zach Taylor, and obviously another storyline coming out of this game. Jamar Chase, he spits on Jalen Ramsey after the game, said he didn't, and then a video comes out. Fox 19 actually was all over this. There's, hundreds of cameras at these NFL games, but I think really only the Fox 19 one was able to catch this. Am I going to sit here and defend a grown man for spitting on another grown man? No, I'm not going to do that, but I do have some thoughts there on that situation. Some people are acting like, he went out there and killed his dog, which he didn't do, but obviously it is gross and nasty to spit on another player. So we are going to discuss that as well on today's show. Also, plenty to discuss around the National Football League and college football. UC basketball, who'd they play? Mount St. Mary's. They were losing at halftime. That's not good. They come back to win that game. Some guys, a couple of double figures, Mustafa Cham, Baba Miller, were able to put together solid performances there in the second half. But, again, you're playing Mount St. Mary's, so that's not ideal. We'll see if they can get things cleaned up before Friday, because that game at the Heritage Bank Center against Louisville. Louisville's, by all means, a national title team. And, yeah, hard to imagine Cincinnati. I mean, that's going to be a double-digit spread, right? So we'll talk Bearcats basketball throughout the week. Bearcats football, by the way, loses to Arizona. Now they have 3 losses. They got BYU coming to town. And a couple of weeks ago, we were all talking about, this game against BYU, it could really be an opportunity to punch your ticket into the Big 12 title game. But you lose a couple of games, you get blown out by Utah. You lose to an Arizona team that just isn't very good. And all of a sudden, you're kind of sliding in the wrong direction here once again to end the season. So very disappointing for the Bearcats football team there as well. College football was great, though. Beyond that, Alabama gets upset at home against Oklahoma. We talked about it a lot, this Alabama team. They're very reliant on Ty Simpson being spectacular and that passing attack being spectacular. And they got kind of exposed. Obviously, Oklahoma won the turnover battle 3-0. When you do that on the road, you always have an opportunity. And Bama not able to come back and win that game, and that's back-to-back defeats. First loss for Kalen DeBoer at home as the head coach of Alabama, and this Auburn game coming up in a couple weeks must win for them to punch their ticket into the college football playoff. So we'll talk about that. Georgia, by the way, dominant against Texas. They looked really good there in that game. I think Texas, they were they stunk the past few weeks, but they were somehow winning, so people kind of bought back in a little bit, and then it's like, okay, this is the real Texas team there. That offensive line is bad for Arch Manning. So we'll talk a little bit about that game. Georgia's certainly going to vault up my top 10, which we will do, of course, on Wednesday morning. Looking forward to that. But Ohio State against UCLA, Ryan Day said after the game, workmanlike, businesslike, right? Nico Iamaleava, of course, didn't even play the game. Not that they really had much of a chance even with him, but Ohio State dominated vaccinated start to finish. Saying banged up his, I believe his ankle a little bit, but he should be fine going forward. Kind of load management stuff a little bit for Ohio State. You saw Jeremiah Smith didn't really play much there towards the end. Carnell Tate sat out again, so Ohio State's just trying to continue to find ways to win games, and everything is kind of setting up for that game on Thanksgiving weekend against Michigan, and that's going to be a huge game in the Big House, and that will be certainly a lot of fun to talk about. But plenty to discuss here on the show. Obviously, we will start with the Cincinnati Bengals, as we always do. 34-12, they lose. And, if you would have told me that the defense was going to have a point in the game where they forced 3 consecutive punts, I would have said, you're lying to me right now. I would not have believed that for a single second. But there was a period there in the first half where they were getting off the field, right? A couple of negative plays. Myles Murphy, by no means am I in on Myles Murphy now, but obviously that was probably the best game of his career. He had some disruptive moments there in the wake of no Trey Hendrickson and, of course, no Shamar Stewart. No Shamar Stewart, and the defense plays significantly better. I think that's kind of a telltale sign a little bit there. Linebackers obviously continued to play really bad. I did like how they kind of took a few snaps away a little bit from Demetrius Knight. They put Oren Burks out there more throughout the rest of the year if they want to play better on defense. They're going to have to play Oren Burks a little bit more. I understand that at this point you're kind of turning the page towards 2026. You're trying to see, okay, can Barrett Carter and Demetrius Knight be guys for us going forward? Clearly that does not look good here at this point, but I think you start to see those linebackers play a little bit better with Burks, who is more of a special team guy. I would like to see him get some more reps there going forward. Barrett Carter, of course, disastrous performance. We'll talk about him. Geno Stone there as well. But, you start the game, and, Pittsburgh goes down and scores a touchdown, right? They had a huge run from Jalen Warren where he's just slicing through guys, missed tackles, more of the same. And, we talked about this. You can fix stuff from a scheme perspective when you have a bye, right? You have an opportunity to improve, change some things, right, from a coaching standpoint. But when your issues are you're not quick enough, you're not fast enough, you're not strong enough, and you can't tackle, that's not really something that is going to get fixed over the course of a bye week. And very quickly there, that first drive, 8 plays, 78 yards, about 5 minutes. Talk about, business-like and workman-like with Ohio State, but that's exactly what that drive was from Aaron Rodgers there to start the game. And then, you have an opportunity. Okay, let's see what this Bengals defense or Bengals offense does in response to that. And, the win definitely was a factor, right? People talk about excuses, and I understand that. But, the win clearly was a factor in this game. And Joe Flacco, we'll talk about him a little bit more specifically. People are banging on him for his performance. Was this his worst performance as a Cincinnati Bengal? Yes, I think that's very clear and very fair that we can go say that. But let's not act like this was a Jake Browning performance by Joe Flacco here. And clearly he is not 100%. Clearly, really, he's not close to 100%. I have a lot of appreciation and gratitude for how he's handled that, how he's gutted through that for guys that he hardly knows, right? He's only been here for a few weeks. He's playing through this AC joint, trying to be out there and be a competent guy, a good player before Joe Burrow comes back. And, he made some throws there, especially on third down early in the game. How about Yoshi? All right, he didn't do anything really after the first quarter, but he had those 3 catches there. They were big-time catches, some execution there on the later downs. Jamar had a play there on third down. You find a way to move the football down the football field, and that was certainly positive for the offense to go out there and do it. Now, of course, people are going to pick apart Zach Taylor and a lot of his decisions throughout the game. Of course, Bengals fans and people in the media do that each and every week. And his first real decision was, what do you do here after this penalty? Obviously, the Bengals had just tied the game, but then there was, roughing the long snapper and an opportunity to potentially steal a lead here and get 8-7. And for the record, that's the right decision from Zach Taylor. You just move down the ball down the football field offensively. You catch a break with a penalty. You're on the 1-yard line. Bengals haven't been dreadful in short yardage this year. And you go out there and you try to kind of steal a lead, right? Steal an additional point. And, obviously people are going to bang on the play call, right? When you call something like that, Reed brought this up on off the bench. I am for always having a play that you've repped a ton, that you have a ton of confidence in when you run the 2-point. Even if in that early of the game. Don't waste your best play, but you can waste a pretty good one. The fact that it's always got to be some gadgety stuff, and, if you're the Detroit Lions, right, or if you're the Chicago Bears, that kind of fits into your identity. But that's not Zach Taylor. That's not Dan Pitcher. That's not Joe Flacco. This isn't a gadgety offense. And then you get Chase Brown out there, and he catches the ball. And I thought it was going to be good. I was like, oh, he's going to roll out, and he's going to hit Joe Flacco. He's going to catch it. It's going to be 2 points. And then he didn't even look Joe Flacco's way. And, again, I'm not some, X's and O's guy. I don't know exactly what the plan was there. I don't think Zach Taylor talked about it specifically, if that was even an option. But the guy that was lined up on the outside, the defensive back, he came crashing down. There was literally nobody on Joe Flacco. So if Chase Brown just would have caught it and thrown it out to Flacco, it would have been 2 points. Again, I don't know if that was a coaching point. I don't know if that was an option or if it was just run up the middle the whole way. So obviously it's a tough break there, but you sit there and you go, okay, if this is probably going to be a shootout, kind of what it felt like there after the first couple of drives, despite the fact that the wind obviously was a factor. And then this is something that Ted Karras alluded to after the game, was that you just haven't been able to play a complementary style of football at all through any of these games. We're sitting here on November 17th, and you literally haven't had one where it was like, the offense was solid, and the defense was solid there as well. Maybe you could argue week 1 against Cleveland, but the offense wasn't really solid in that game, right? And then the defense gets hot. They force 3 consecutive punts there. Aaron Rodgers was getting frustrated, and I get the other side is like, well, the Pittsburgh Steelers, they got DK Metcalf and a bunch of bums out there from a receiving core perspective, and they struggled mightily against the Los Angeles Chargers. I understand all those things, but for this Bengals defense, who, if you would have went out there and said, yeah, the Steelers are going to score every time they touch the ball, it might not always be a touchdown, but they're going to score every time, I would have said, okay, yeah, I kind of believe that. And then you string together these punts, and you're like, oh my goodness, we're going to have an opportunity here to get back into this game and potentially take a lead. And then unfortunately, the offense just wasn't able to match that. I thought early in the game, the offensive line started strong. As the game continued to go on, the offensive line got progressively worse. We've talked in recent weeks when the offense has kind of been humming that, oh, this offensive line, they're putting things together. We even had a segment that we did on the show. I asked, Gabby Sorrentino and, Richard Skinner about this. Like, hey, could this offensive line be the same group next year? Like, you roll them out in week 1. Is this a real possibility? And I think it still could be, but obviously Orlando Brown Jr. continues to be awful, right? Amarius Mims, he was banged up in this game. He seemingly always is. He was, slow getting to some spots there. Jalen Rivers also got banged up. He didn't have a very good game. I thought Fairchild did a nice job for the Cincinnati Bengals, but the offensive line not quite able to hold up. If there's one thing or another thing you can, criticize Zach for in this game, I would like to see the ball get out a little bit quicker, right? Your quarterback's got this AC joint issue. You don't want to be hanging there in the pocket with these long developing routes, especially in the wind. Let's get it to T. Let's get it to Jamar early, and they really weren't able to do that. And they found themselves in some long yardage situations, and they weren't able to convert. And as it was happening, it kind of felt like it was a missed opportunity for this team when you're like, man, the defense is finally getting off the field. Are they playing great? No, but they're getting off the field. They're forcing some punts. And the offense has been terrific in recent weeks. And that Steelers defense, yeah, there's some big names on there, but they had some guys that are banged up, right? There's no reason the Bengals couldn't have scored some points there in that game. And unfortunately, it just kind of became a punt battle where you're kind of just punting back and forth there. And then ultimately you give up a field goal, and then it's 10-6 going into the half. But really, from a defensive perspective, the 3 main takeaways are, 1, Barrett Carter is in over his skis. Right, there's a real possibility that this guy can't play in the National Football League. Clearly, that looks to be the case right now, but there's just a lot of things that are not good. And when you play linebacker, you can get away with not being great if you're an interior guy. And maybe even on the back end of your defense, if you get a favorable matchup, you can get away with it. If you're a bad linebacker and your running mate's also bad, you're going to get exposed. And that's what was happening there with Barrett Carter. He doesn't have the short area quickness, the lateral quickness, the speed, the strength, the angles. He's not seeing, like, literally everything, unfortunately for Barrett Carter, is going wrong out there. And then when you have that at the linebacker position, as I just mentioned, when your running mate is a rookie or a guy like Oren Burks, who you kind of view as more of a special team kind of guy, it's going to look really, really bad. And I thought, Barrett Carter's really struggled this year to this point, but that clearly was his worst performance. And that's got to be one of the worst linebacker performances that we've seen in the NFL in recent memory. Like, yeah, that's really bad. The missed tackles, the bad angles, getting bullied out there. And then that's takeaway number 1 is Barrett Carter he's got a long, long way to go. And I don't know if you can, have him be a guy for you next year. We'll see. There's still plenty of games to be played, but there's really no reason to be optimistic at this point for Barrett Carter. That's just the reality of the situation. Geno Stone's the other guy. We've been on this for a long time. It was very evident when the Bengals signed him last year early on that, this doesn't look right. Right? Things looked pretty good when you were playing him in Baltimore, when he was a member of the Ravens and he was picking off Joe Burrow and he was making big-time hits, he was crashing down in the run game. Looked good, right? I'll be the first to admit. Bengals signed Geno Stone to a 2-year, $14 million deal. I was like, let's go, right? He ain't Jesse Bates, but we'll be in a spot where we can, hold down a little bit on the back end. It just never got going. It was bad from the beginning, and they have continued to stick with it, which I don't understand that for the life of me. I don't know if there is some personal guarantee. I mean, there's nothing in his contract or something where it's like, Geno, we will play you. We promise we will. I don't understand. I do not understand. And look, Tyson Anderson, again, we all love him as a special teamer. The fact that he's not even getting a chance to go out there and play a little bit, like this stuff with Geno Stone, man, is really, really bad, right? Because if you're slow and you can't cover, you better be able to tackle. And that's the worst part about his game, because he can't tackle at all. And I don't know if it's just a lack of athleticism or if it's a lack of effort, but when he was going after Darnell Washington, I mean, that is some of the worst pursuit / tackling. I can't even call that tackling. I don't know what that is. Like, he's just running in the direction of Darnell Washington and just kind of bumping into him. Like, I mean, I don't get it. I do not get it at all. And he continues to go out there and play for this team and play a lot and play frequently. And even there at the end of the game, where it was after the pick six, the game was kind of over there already. But when he's getting face masked, and it was a face mask on the offense, and it was a good call. But like, even there, he's just getting worked. Just absolutely worked. And, I credit him for restructuring his contract. He said, for the most part, the right things in the media. But at this level in the NFL, you can't continue to roll him out there. I don't get it. We said after last season that he should be cut. Bengals said, we're not going to cut him, but we're going to pay him less money. He said, that's fine. I deserve less money based on my performance, and it has gotten even worse. So those two guys, right, it's the whole operations fault. Everybody that touches the field, everybody that graces the surface for this Bengals defense are at fault here and should be blamed. And that goes with the coaches and the personnel, of course, there as well. But the two players, when you have two guys that are that bad, in Barrett Carter and Geno Stone, it looks really, really bad. It looks really, really bad. And the final takeaway there, the third takeaway, I guess, is just Darnell Washington just absolutely wrecking you. Now, I get it. He's like 300 pounds. He's a massive dude. He probably would do that to a lot of different teams. But when you're whiffing on him at the line of scrimmage and your backers are missing and you got DBs that are getting blasted, and like DJ Turner, who we believe in, like there was a couple times where he was just getting rocked by Darnell Washington. And obviously that is a really, really bad situation there. But you felt fortunate to go into the half and be down 10-6, and you're like, you know what? You're going to get an opportunity here to possess the football starting the third quarter, and there was reason to be optimistic there. And it was, frustrating that, finally the defense does something and the offense plays poorly. But then there's some optimism, right? I went into the half saying, you know what? Here we go for the Cincinnati Bengals. Real opportunity here to win this game, or at least cover the 5.5, right? And then you get the ball. And then the report comes out that, Aaron Rodgers, he's not going to be out there. And you're like, oh, my goodness, Mason Rudolph. It's not like they got Mac Jones, right? It's Mason Rudolph, who he ain't that good. Let's be completely honest here. And you're like, well, the defense is playing solid. You feel like the offense will pick it up. And you get the ball here, and you put together a solid drive, right? 7 plays, 51 yards, took a couple of minutes there, and you scored. You get 10-9. It's a 1-point game. And, you would have liked to see some more execution when they get in field goal range, but, you'll take it, right? It's a 1-point game. And then all of a sudden the defense kind of reverts back to old habits, right, in the second half. And honestly, there was only 2 drives for this Steelers team. 2 drives. That's it. If you go back and look at the game, there was 2 drives for this Steelers team on offense in the second half with Mason Rudolph, and you just gave up huge plays on 3rd and long. I believe it was definitely a 3rd and 17, and I think 2 3rd and 11s there as well. And when you're giving up all 3 of those to a Mason Rudolph, that's not good. That is not good at all. There was lapses in coverage. There was bad tackling. And on top of it, it wasn't like it was, boom, a huge explosive, and boom, they scored like that. They were just kind of wearing you down and chewing the clock and picking up first downs and moving the ball. And then you're able to get a stop. It was a 15-play drive. After you kicked the field goal, Steelers took a 15-play drive, took up over 7.5 minutes of the clock there in the third quarter. And then they kick a field goal. And it's like, you know what? That wasn't great defensively, but we hung in there. We bent and didn't break there in that spot. And then this is where kind of things completely changed on you. And we talked about this on Off the Bench with the Cincinnati Bengals. You are not in a spot. And this is, this just shows you're a bad football team when you're in a spot like this. But when you're in a spot like the Cincinnati Bengals and you don't play perfect or you make one mistake. Obviously, a pick six in the NFL is a huge mistake. If the Rams throw a pick six, they can overcome it, right? Shoot, even the Baltimore Ravens and all their struggles, they can overcome it, right? You look at others, the Buffalo Bills can overcome it. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they can overcome it. The Bengals aren't in a spot right now where they can overcome a pick six. And they were moving the ball, plus territory, in Steelers' range, right? I think it was a 3rd and 9 when Flacco threw it. And, if you get like 4 or 5 yards there on that play, you probably send McPherson out again, and boom, it's a 1-point game, 4th quarter, right? If you're Zach Taylor, if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, and you said – flying in to Pittsburgh a couple of days prior, and you sat there and said it will be a 1-point game going into the 4th quarter or at the very beginning of the 4th quarter, every single person would say, sign me up. And then you have a huge mistake, and you throw an interception. And at first I'm thinking, what in the heck is Joe Flacco doing here on this play? Like, that was like a Jake Browning type of decision. You go back, obviously he was hit, and that impacted it a little bit. So, excuse me, bad decision from Joe Flacco to kind of still let go of the ball there. Bad job by the offensive line there in that spot there as well. And ultimately, Kyle Duggar picks it off. And remember, we were lamenting a couple of weeks ago before the trade deadline, Pittsburgh, they went out and then they tried to get better. And the Bengals weren't in a spot where they were dead, right? We were all sitting there like, yeah, things don't look good, but maybe you go get a safety, you could have an opportunity here, right? Kyle Duggar, you could have traded for Kyle Duggar, right? Now, based on how the season was going and you already made the trade for Flacco, like, would that have been a great decision, giving up more capital? Probably not. But Duggar was out there to trade. Pittsburgh, they want to win, right? They're this winning organization. I get they haven't won a playoff game in Lord knows how long, right? But they make decisions to try to win. They went out there and got Kyle Duggar. Who picks it off? Safety Kyle Duggar, who, by the way, has transformed their defense. They've played a ton better since he's been in there. And he picks it off and he takes it the other way. And we'll talk about Jamar spitting in a second. But I would encourage everybody to go back and watch the interception, right? Again, we just said the Bengals aren't good enough to overcome a pick six. There is no reason that Kyle Duggar should have scored on that play. No reason. You have Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase on the football field. Now, it's not just if you watch it once maybe and you're not really paying attention, you might think, Stone, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? They were there. They were chasing after him. They were running, right? Jamar was all the way down there on the 5. Like, what are you talking about? They were there. They were giving effort. That wasn't full effort. That was not max effort, right? Don't lie to yourself and say it was, because it was not. You go back there and watch it. Tee Higgins, he starts running there at first, and then once Duggar hits about that 30-yard line, he slows it down a little bit and kind of just coasts, and Duggar goes into the end zone. Jamar, he was there. He was running. He was there at the 5. Just kind of olays him in, right? Yeah, we'll get there at the 5, and you make a little juke, and I'll just olay you. Welcome to the end zone, right? Those are your two of your best players. Those are the guys that you are paying big money deals. They should be full sprint. I get Jamar was running hard down there after him. We've all seen Jamar kick it into gear and go full sprint. That was not full sprint. Don't lie to yourself. It was not. Now, the counter argument is, they make a play at the 5-yard line. Pittsburgh still probably punches in. That's fine, but that doesn't feel exactly the same as a pick six, right? A pick six, when you're in the spot that Cincinnati is as a team, is impossible to overcome, especially in the waning seconds of the 3rd quarter, early 4th quarter, right? I get Jamar ran down there. That was not full speed. That was not full speed. He can make that play at the 5-yard line. He is the best athlete on the field. He could have gotten Duggar down. He could have gotten him out of bounds. Don't kid yourself. Don't do it. Olayed him into the end zone. I'm more frustrated about that than the spitting, to be completely honest with you. The spitting's gross. It's disgusting. It's embarrassing. It's not something you should do, especially if you are a captain of the football team and you have a media press conference every week because the team and the organization view you as a captain. I get that. I'm more ticked off about the effort there on the pick six. Shouldn't have gotten in the end zone. You watch Tee Higgins. He takes off there at first. He hit about that 30-yard line. He starts coasting. I got a problem with that. That's not good. And again, it wasn't, Yoshi and somebody or Mitchell Tinsley or Burton or somebody. It's your 2 guys. It's your 2 dogs. It's 2 of your guys that are getting a huge portion of your salary cap. That wasn't max effort. Yeah, they were running. Yeah, Jamar got down there. Was not max effort. Obviously, that changed the game at that point. When that happens, it's 20-9. And unfortunately, you're not good enough there in that spot. You're thinking, well, the defense, they played well in the first half, but there's no confidence that they could get this thing turned around and get a stop late in the game, right? Again, defense played well in the first half. But when they need to be special, when this team says, at this point, we need you to be clutch, we need you to get a stop, we need you to get a turnover, they're never solid in those spots. And that showed again. So it's 20-9. Bengals responded. They moved the ball a little bit. There was a nice throw there on the boundary to Tee, and it was like, okay, maybe there's a little life here. They kick a field goal. Oh, it's a one-possession game once again. And then the next drive was just kind of a microcosm of the Bengals season to this point. 12 plays, 65 yards. They chew up 6 minutes of clock. Bad tackling, not in the right spot. Bad from Geno. Bad from Barrett Carter. More time for Rudolph to operate the offense. They go down there and score. And if it didn't feel like it was over after the pick six, obviously after they chewed 6 minutes of clock off in the fourth quarter and it was 27-12, it was very much over at that point. So really only 2 opportunities there defensively. And again, the first drive, you held them to 3. It was like, okay, we'll take it. So, but that last drive where the Bengals, I think it was Gainwell again that scored. It's just that was the Bengals defense that we have come accustomed to seeing here. And then you had the fumble return for a touchdown. That just, kind of what Zach was saying after the game, like, well, it didn't feel like 34-12. I hear you. I don't know if I would have said that if I was Zach Taylor, but I hear you, right? The game was already over at that point, and then Fant fumbles back the other way. And next thing you know, you look up and it's like, wow, it is 34-12. Whereas like a second ago, you're like, well, it's 13-9, and we're about to at least make this thing 13-12. And then it just flips upside down on you, and you lose the game 34-12. So, and the margins are thin, man, in the National Football League, and especially when you're a team like the Cincinnati Bengals that have as many holes as they do. If you're going to make a huge mistake like that and give up a pick six, that's going to lose you the game. They're not good enough to overcome that kind of stuff, right? And then obviously, the other turnover later. But the game was already lost there at that point. But, you had opportunities in the first half where your defense was playing well. You could have gotten a lead. You had an opportunity to have a lead and then also possess the ball to begin the second half. And, by the way, Aaron Rodgers was not even playing. And, credit to the Bengals defense. They were pressuring him. I thought it was kind of weird to me because Aaron Rodgers usually just kind of gets rid of the ball, but he was kind of holding on to the ball, and there was opportunities to hit him, right? Murphy had a sack. Osai was in. There was some quarterback pressures there. They hit him, and, obviously ultimately knocked him out of the game. So, the defense did some things there in the first half, but then you weren't able to couple it with any quality performance there, and obviously you lose again. There's really not much to say. Zach after the game's like, yeah, we got to find a way to win. And he's right. They got to find a way to win. But there's, the playoffs done, right? I guess you could win out and probably get in. But don't kid yourself. This team's not winning out, even with Joe Burrow, right? Which, by the way, is a conversation. We've had that conversation, but I guess we'll have it again later in the week. But I don't really want to because he's going to play at some point. But we can discuss that later in the week there as well. All right, let's talk about the spitting. It's a feisty game, obviously, between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals. And let me be very, very clear here up front. I am not defending Jamar Chase for spitting on another player. I'm not sitting here and saying, you know what, we'll give him a pass. That's fine, right? But I'm also not going to sit here and act like he killed Jalen Ramsey's dog because he didn't do that either, all right? I am not a parent at this point. Hopefully someday that will happen. And if my kid, theoretically, were ever in that spot where he's spitting on another kid, there would be serious repercussions. Serious repercussions, right? Because it's just nasty. It's gross. It's disrespectful. And candidly, it's not manly, right? It's not. Just to spit on a guy, like, what are you doing? That's just gross, all right? Jamar Chase clearly has a lot of frustration, clearly has a lot of vitriol towards the Pittsburgh Steelers, and clearly has a lot of hatred. This wasn't a situation where he spit on a Denver Bronco or he spit on a Green Bay Packer. It was a Pittsburgh Steeler. And this is a situation between the Bengals and the Steelers where it's nasty. It is nasty. Again, I'm not condoning what he did. I'm really not. But I'm also just trying to put you in the mind a little bit of Jamar Chase. People talk about, I saw this, floating around on social media. That is the most disrespectful thing you could do to another man. People are saying that. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. But, yeah, that's why Jamar Chase did it. That's why he did it. to Jalen Ramsey. He has got no love. He has got no respect for Jalen Ramsey, and that's why he went out there and did it. He's going to pay the price for it, right? Obviously, it happened earlier in the year with Jalen Carter and the Philadelphia Eagles. It happened like basically as the game was starting. So he was going to get suspended, but the NFL kind of walked that back and was like, well, he basically already played out his suspension because he didn't play the entire Cowboy game. It'll be interesting to see how Jamar's situation is handled. It was also a fine of close to $60,000, which I think it will probably be more than that for Jamar. And, obviously he got to stay in the game, so you would think that he would be suspended for the New England game. And if that happens, he had it coming, right? He had it coming if he does. You would have liked to see that kind of energy be channeled in a different way, whether it be hitting somebody hard. Maybe it's a little bit after the whistle. Maybe it be not throwing a punch, but just somebody setting a tone. And that's not what spitting does, right? Spitting doesn't set a tone. But it also shows you how ticked off he is. I don't have a problem with him being ticked off. I don't have a problem with him fueling that kind of hatred towards the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you're a Cincinnati Bengal and you play the Pittsburgh Steelers, you need to operate with that kind of hatred. But it just can't come out via spit. It's got to come out with a hard hit or a big-time play or mossing somebody. Can't come out via spit. So I get where the anger is coming from. I get where that mindset is coming from. It just didn't come out in the right way, obviously, with the spit. Now, when I watched it at first, before the video came out about him getting spit on, I thought it was outstanding by Jamar because you just see Jalen Ramsey go after him and Jamar doesn't do anything. And you're like, oh, great job by Jamar. He gets the 15 yards. Then the video comes out where it's like, well, he spit on him and then he didn't do anything. And it'll be fascinating to see how, one, Zach Taylor here very shortly addresses this and how Jamar Chase addresses it there as well, because the video is clear as day. He did. There's really no excuse you can come up with of like, well, maybe he wasn't trying to spit on. It seemed like he pretty much spit on him. So it'll be very interesting to hear how Zach Taylor addresses this situation, because Zach Taylor has always gone to bat for Jamar Chase, always. When Jamar Chase has his frustration, when he lashes out, Zach always defends him. He can't defend this. He spit on another guy, and he's supposed to be a face of your organization that you look to as a leader and a captain. He spit on another guy. That can't happen. Very interested to hear what Zach Taylor says, and very interested to hear what Jamar Chase says as well, because they asked him after the game, and he was like, nah, I didn't spit on him, right? And he was really rolling the dice there, because there's a lot of cameras here at these NFL games, as we all know. By the way, I think the only camera that got him was Fox 19, which is obviously local here in Cincinnati, so shout out to them for coming up with that footage. But I think all the other cameras, I don't know if I've only seen the one angle, so big shout out to Fox 19 for getting that. But what's he going to do? Is he going to come out and apologize? That doesn't seem like Jamar. Maybe his agent or the Bengals will make him, but he's not going to come out on his own and say sorry, right? Is he going to continue to live in denial? That wouldn't be very smart either, right? Is he going to sit there and say, oh, I didn't do it? Well, there's a video of you doing it, right? It wouldn't shock me if he tried to continue to deny it, but clearly there is video of him spitting, right? Or is he just going to sit there and say, I have no comment on this, play out the suspension, play out the fine, and try to move on? I think that's probably what you do here. Again, Jamar Chase coming out and apologizing, that doesn't seem like Jamar Chase. And again, this wasn't a Green Bay Packer, right? This wasn't a Denver Bronco. Shoot, this wasn't a Baltimore Raven. This is a Pittsburgh Steeler, right? And we all remember the picture of Jamar a couple of years ago looking down Minka Fitzpatrick and letting him know what was up, right? He got no love for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I commend him for that. I think more people should operate with that kind of mindset, that kind of anger towards that team. Because that's what it means as a Cincinnati Bengal. You should not have anything good to say about Pittsburgh, but you got to channel it in a better situation than spitting on a guy, right? Unfortunately. So that's all I really have to say about that. We'll see what the punishment looks like. I would expect him to be suspended. Obviously, that hurts the team significantly. Very interested to hear what Zach says. Very interested to hear what Jamar says coming out. He baited him into getting the penalty. Again, by no means defending Jamar Chase here. He's going to get punished. He deserves to be punished. But also, let's not sit here and act like he killed somebody, because he didn't do that either. And the people that are like, oh, my God, I can't believe that this would happen. The stuff that goes on in between the white lines, the stuff these people say, right, the times that people have got spit on and that haven't been caught for it, the crazy things that happen in the bottom of those piles. I get as a society we want to turn a blind eye toward that a little bit and think a little bit more highly of some of these players, but it gets nasty out there. It gets mean and it gets nasty, it gets dirty and it gets violent, and people cross the line every single Sunday. Every single Sunday. But when you're Jamar Chase and you're a leader of an organization, can't be happening. That kind of mistake can't happen. But the people that are just so appalled, like, I can't believe this would happen. It's the National Football League. These players are crazy, right? I mean, this is, like, think about what transpires on a football field. I mean, you can't go out and hit somebody on the street, right? Well, you can level somebody on a football field. Like, these guys go to a different place up here in their mind. And this kind of stuff happens, right? People are like, oh, I can't believe he's awful. Nobody in their right mind would ever consider doing something that bad. Stuff like this happens all the time. I get it. People don't get caught for spitting, right? It was the second time this year, and Jay Morrison said hasn't really been an issue since 2006. That's been a really long time. I get that. The point I'm trying to make is mean, crazy, nasty, weird stuff happens out on the football field. And when you're Jamar Chase, you just can't be doing that. I get where he's coming from. I get the anger. I get the hatred. It's got to come out in a different way than spitting. And we'll see what the punishment is for him. All right. I'll probably do it for our Bengals conversation here today. 34-12, Cincinnati loses. They dropped to 3-7. They started 2-0, and of course they are 1-7 over the course of their last 8 games, which obviously is not good. They're 1-4 on the road. They come back home here to Cincinnati. I don't know if that is a good thing necessarily. We've got the Patriots at 1 in our power rankings. I definitely think they're beatable, but what has the Bengals shown that they can go potentially toe-to-toe with the Patriots? I don't know, but we'll talk about that throughout the week there, of course. And we'll have an eye on the whole Jamar Chase situation. And, of course, we'll have an update when his punishment and his fine comes down. Eagles win on Sunday Night Football last night. They win ugly. This Eagles team, it's very interesting to watch them play football because offensively they're a really tough watch. I get why they have all these primetime games. They just won the Super Bowl. They've got some high-profile players, but they go 3-and-out more than anybody, and here with Saquon this year, it's like they don't even really have the home run threat with him. I mean, it feels like he hasn't – I think they said he only has 2 or 3 runs over 20 yards all year, which just is crazy to wrap your head around. I think Jalen Hurts has done a nice job of not making mistakes, right? The pick against the Giants and that loss on Thursday night is really the one that comes to mind. But beyond that, he's done a really nice job of protecting the football. And when you have a defense that talented and you have good players like that, oftentimes if you just protect the football and not make that huge mistake, like throwing a pick 6 what Joe Flacco did, you're going to be in a good spot. But my biggest takeaway from that game was the Eagles' defense, right? Because they are real. They were good last year, and a big reason why they were able to get to the Super Bowl and a big reason why they were ultimately able to win the Super Bowl there as well. But what they have done from a drafting perspective, Howie Roseman is tremendous. Bengals certainly could take a page out of his book. Jihad Campbell out of Alabama, right? Linebacker. He was there for the taking. Bengals didn't take him, right? And they've got all kinds of linebackers. Kobe Dean is awesome there. That front is incredible for him. Jalen Carter, who we were just talking about, him spitting. He puts his hands up, does a nice job. Jordan Davis, I bet, by the way, had like 3 pass breakups there at the line of scrimmage. So they got guys flying around, making plays at all times. And they're not the most fun watch, but they're going to be a threat in this thing the rest of the way. Absolutely. No doubt about it. But Detroit, man, when they're in the friendly confines of Ford Field in a temperature-controlled environment and, then they can really cut things loose offensively. But if it gets a little bit nastier out, gets a little bit colder out, gets a little bit windier out, Jared Goff doesn't look like a top 10, top 12 quarterback. He looks really mid, so to speak. And he has a really tough job moving around, too, and that kind of gets exposed. And, I mean, just looking at him, he looked like he was freezing. I don't want my quarterback to look like that, right? Tom Brady all those years in Foxborough, it never, like, he might be bundled up and there might be, you might be able to see the breath coming out of his mouth on a cold night, but it was never like, oh, he looks freezing. out there. Jared Goff looked like he was shivering. I don't know if I want my quarterback to look like that, to be honest with you. He had the double glove thing going there as well. He was inaccurate with the football. He was kind of rushing. He wasn't trusting what he was seeing. He wasn't trusting his protection, and they couldn't get anything going. If you stayed up and watched that game, like, they could not get squat going offensively. And of course they still were going for it on, fourth down, and they were in these fourth down manageable situations where they typically execute, and they just couldn't. I mean, the Eagles weren't necessarily bringing a ton of pressure. They were just bringing 4, and they were getting close to getting home. Goff was rushing, and it was really, really bad for the Detroit Lions. So I've got serious concerns with them going forward, because people talked about it. I knew this was going to happen with Dan Campbell taking over as the play caller from Morton. That first week against Washington, well, it's one thing to call offensive plays against the Commanders. So that's a whole different one to call plays against the Philadelphia Eagles. And there were times there where it felt like the play was called a little bit late, and clearly, I mean, his guys weren't open, right? I mean, there were some opportunities. If you're an elite quarterback with elite accuracy, you can make those throws, and Jared Goff in a controlled environment typically does make a lot of those throws, but they were blanketed, all right, throughout that secondary for the Philadelphia Eagles, and that is certainly something to watch, because I think a lot of people over the course of the past few weeks are like, yeah, the Lions will be fine. They'll still be a threat in this thing. Well, now all of a sudden you got a play caller issue, right? Is Dan Campbell going to continue to do this? Is he going to give it back? That's a whole conversation that needs to be happening there in Detroit as well. And, I think they're really banged up on the back end of that defense. I think they did a nice job. They got, by the way, that call to end the game was not good. Obviously, that went against Detroit. Rocky Scene got called for the PI. I hate to see a game end that way. I didn't think that was pass interference. But they got lots of questions and lots of things that they need to answer going forward. But the Eagles pull off a win. They stay hot. Doesn't look great. They clearly were trying to go to A.J. Brown. That was another interesting thing about that game. Brown, of course, went out on social media or Twitch or whatever and was basically like, yeah, cut me from your fantasy team. We're in deep trouble here in Philadelphia. And they clearly were trying to get him the football in this game. Didn't really equate to a lot. A couple of drops, by the way, in the game for Philadelphia, especially early. Goddard had one. I think Devontae Smith had one later on there as well. But, if the defense for Philly plays like that, they're going to be able to win every game and could still potentially win a Super Bowl. And it kind of feels like at some point they'll figure things out offensively. And Collinsworth was making a great point on the broadcast last night. This Eagles team offensively, they're different when Jalen Hurts runs the football, right? And they haven't ran him much this year. Obviously, they're trying to protect him. Hurts, it feels like, has been hurt, no pun intended, throughout the majority of his career. He's always had something banged up. So maybe they're just trying to protect him, and they'll start to run it a little bit more when it gets late or into the postseason. But they're a totally different team when he's a threat with his legs. I think he only ran it a couple times, but that was a big reason why they were able to win, right? A draw play there on third down was huge, and they are better as a team when Jalen Hurts is running the football. And I think in order to reach their peak, they need to do that. And we'll ultimately see if Sirianni and Patullo and those guys make that kind of decision for Philadelphia going forward. Minnesota Vikings lost to the Chicago Bears. Wasn't a best bet of the weekend. Bears were plus 2.5, and it was like, yeah, it feels like it should probably be more of a pick 'em here. I get, going to Minnesota is tough. Brian Flores, tremendous defensive coordinator. That can be really, really challenging. But I said this from the minute Minnesota drafted him, and I've said it every start he has made, and I'm going to continue to say it. You cannot win enough games in this league with J.J. McCarthy. You cannot get to the postseason with J.J. McCarthy as your quarterback. You just can't. And Kevin O'Connell is tremendous, right? As a play caller, as a quarterback mastermind, as somebody that can develop that position, he is great. And if it looks like this with him, it's not going to look good anywhere, right? It is not going to look good anywhere. And if I'm the Minnesota Vikings, I am doing everything in my power to trade for Mac Jones. Mac Jones, of course, started many games this year for the San Francisco 49ers, played tremendous, right? He is the reason they are still alive in this thing. He has been great protecting the football, throwing for a bunch of yards, spreading it out. There's been injuries all over the place, right? Pearsall just came back. He was having backups at the receiver position. He was tremendous. And I think, if Brock Purdy would have struggled in this game against Arizona, it would have got noisy quickly out in California about, well, should we roll with Mac Jones here? And again, when you're in a situation where you just paid the quarterback huge money, you have to go to him, right? I still think, right, in my gut that Brock Purdy is a better quarterback than Mac Jones. Luckily for Purdy, he played really well in the game against Arizona. They won that game by a landslide, and he'll probably, be the guy going forward. Now, if you're San Francisco, the question is, what do you do? Because now Purdy has shown that he's gotten hurt, right? Remember, he had the big-time elbow injury in the conference title game. He's been banged up. He's missed games here and there. Obviously, the toe caused him to miss large portions of the year to this point. There's value in having Mac Jones. He's clearly the best backup quarterback in the National Football League, and I think he's one of the 32 best quarterbacks on the planet and should be a starter somewhere. But then there's some trade value, right? I think you could certainly get a decent pick, better than a 7th or 6th round pick for Mac Jones, right? And I think if I'm the Minnesota Vikings, you've got pieces. That's a really good defense. You've got a top 2 receiver on this planet in Justin Jefferson, or Addison's really good. You've got some elements of a run game. You are ready to win right here, right now. You just need a quarterback. Mac Jones would thrive in Minnesota. He would be exceptional, and it's indoors too. Don't have to worry about any crazy weather. Obviously, go on the road to Green Bay or things like that, but for the most part, playing indoors, like Mac Jones would be tremendous in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell. And, at some point in this league, if you sit there and try to convince yourself that you made a right decision, that you made a good draft pick, it's going to come back to bite you. It's going to come back to bite you. And the good organizations, they know when to move off, right? San Francisco, the Trey Lance pick, they took him, 3rd overall, and they got Purdy that same draft in the 7th round, and they sat there and they said, oh, my goodness, Brock Purdy's better than the guy that we took at number 3. And that's got to be tough when you're the GM of the Giants and you're sitting down there and you're going, oh, goodness, the guy that we took 3rd overall is worse than the guy that we got last overall. But the good organizations, they say, you know what, we got to flush it, we got to move on. That's what the Niners did. They've had success doing it. The Steelers, right, winning organization. Oh, no, we took Kenny Pickett. Yeah, it's not happening. We got to move off. Minnesota has shown that they're a solid, stable organization that knows what they're doing. They need to make a quick decision here on J.J. McCarthy, because if they run this thing back next year, it's borderline getting too late. And if they run it back the following year, it's definitely getting too late. They have a roster that can win right now, and they have a quarterback that cannot get them to that point. They need to make a move. Mac Jones would be a perfect fit in Minnesota. If I am the Vikings, I am doing everything in my power to try to land Mac Jones. But if you're the Niners, you're like, well, you better give us something good, because we really like him here as a backup. And it was a 2-year deal in San Francisco, so he's under contract for next year. But I think watching Mac Jones, you can say what you want about him. Obviously, it ended poorly in New England. Wasn't really much there in Jacksonville. But, he got dealt a bad hand, right? He had Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels. You're like, oh, it's going to be great. What happened after his rookie year? McDaniels left. Huge problem. And then Belichick said, oh, we're going to put our defensive coordinator and have him call the offensive plays. Joe Burrow wouldn't be successful in that situation if he has the DC to call his plays. It would look really bad. It looked really bad. Mac, he didn't do the best job handling it, right? I think he could have been more mature. I think he could have handled himself better. He obviously had some stuff there with the tripping and whatever things that he was doing that weren't necessarily up to code of a true professional. And, people kind of wrote him off and casted him off. But if you watched him his rookie year and you watched him in college, it was clear he could play in the NFL. And he's proving that here again in San Francisco. And if I'm the Minnesota Vikings, I'm doing everything in my power to potentially land him with the trade here this offseason. Let's talk a little college football here on the show. Slow start for Indiana, but then they just roll Wisconsin, score a ton of points, only gave up 7. That Wisconsin offense, they got no clue what is going on. So Indiana stays hot. They pick up a win. Texas A&M, game of the weekend. 50 minutes into the show here, first time mentioning this. Game of the weekend, any level. Down 30-3 at halftime. And you're like, oh my goodness, they're getting blown out by Beamer in South Carolina, and then comes storming back. Defense balls out, don't give up a singular point, score at will, and they win the game. They absolutely win the game. So it's interesting when I look at Texas A&M. We talk about when these teams face adversity and they have these close wins, how do you view them, right? Because you can either go one of two ways. You either go, well, that showed me a lot that they can win in a tight game, and I actually think highly more highly of them at this point, or you could say, they had no business being in that close of a game. I think lesser of them here at this point. I don't know what to say about Texas A&M here at this point, because it's the biggest comeback in the history of the school, right? Down 30-3 at halftime, at home. And then to be able to just flush it and come back and respond the way they did. They needed to play flawless in the second half, and that's what they did. Marcel Reed, we talk about him being a Heisman candidate, plays a horrible first half where it just looks like he has no clue what's going on. It looks like he completely lost any idea of how to play football. And then he just, flushed it at halftime, no problem. I'll go out there and turn back into Marcel Reed and actually be even a little bit better than the Marcel Reed I had shown throughout the year to that point. He was sensational in the second half, and they come back and win. So they have a layup, I believe, this week, and then they play Texas, who they're going to be favored in that game. Obviously, it's kind of a rivalry, Texas A&M, Texas. But, I mean, you would expect them to win these next two games and be an undefeated team in the SEC title game and kind of go from there. So that incredible game as it relates to Texas A&M and South Carolina. Upset of the weekend, of course, Alabama falls at home to Oklahoma. And we talked about it. Look, I've been high on Alabama. I've had them at number 2 for a while. Obviously, they're not going to be at number 2 anymore here at this point. But they're not a complete football team. They have a lot of different holes. And when their quarterback is not exceptional, things can get really difficult for them. And they are capable of losing to a lot of different teams at that point. And I thought Ty played solid for the most part. He wasn't great. He had to pick 6, right? By the way, Oklahoma won the turnover battle 3-0. So if you want to figure out how they won the game, there you go, 3-0 in the turnover battle. But, we've talked about Alabama having issues running the football, and that kind of was an issue. They ran it okay, but they certainly did not run it well, right? I thought defensively they were fine. There were some questions about, how they would handle an RPO guy like Mateer. They've obviously struggled against that type of player a lot in the past. I thought they did that fine. But 3-0 in the turnover battle, miscues on special teams. They missed a short one there going into the half that I believe would have tied the game there at that point. And then next thing you know, you need a drive to go win the game. And you're not able to capitalize there on 4th down, and ultimately you fall short. So it was a great run for Alabama to this point. They still have everything in front of them. They can beat anybody on any given Sunday. I still believe that they can give Ohio State the best shot out of anybody in the country, besides maybe Georgia. Maybe Georgia gives them a better shot. Alabama, of course, did beat Georgia. But there's a lot of different teams that can beat Alabama. And if you told me they lost the Iron Bowl in a couple weeks to Auburn, I would say, not really surprised. That game's in Auburn, too. That's one of those games, obviously, where you throw everything out the door, regardless of record. Obviously, Auburn's not very good. Would not surprise me at all if they beat Alabama. Would not surprise me at all if they beat them by 10+. Right? That's just the nature of this rivalry. So Alabama most likely not going to be playing in the SEC title game. And then you start to look at this picture and you go, oh, shoot, how many SEC teams are going to make this playoff? I think there's a world where 5 make it. And it sounds crazy. 6 could potentially happen as well. I'm not predicting it. But there's a good chance that 5 are going to make it, right? Because you obviously, A&M, let's just say they beat Texas and whoever they play this week. I think it's a layup team. I don't know exactly. But let's just say they're undefeated. They go to the SEC title game. They're in, regardless of what happens in that game. I would imagine they are going to play Georgia. I think Georgia has a layup. And then they got Georgia Tech, who Georgia Tech nearly beat them last year. So that'll be a difficult game. But we'll just say for the sake of the argument that Georgia wins that game. So they're in the SEC title with 1 loss. So both those teams are in, regardless of what transpires in that game. Then you have Ole Miss, who they're probably not in the SEC title game because they lost to Georgia, but that good chance that's their only loss. So they're in as well. Alabama, of course, if they're in a spot where they beat Auburn, right? If they beat Eastern Illinois and then beat Auburn, they're in as well. So that's 4. And then people have written Oklahoma off, but now you look down and you're like, well, if Oklahoma wins their next 2 games, and I don't believe they have Missouri and then somebody else that isn't a great SEC team, well, then they're in, right? And then you just kind of go down the list and say, well, does Vandy actually, have a shot here to get in? So there's a lot of different teams, and there's one other team that's escaping me right now at this point. But the SEC could get a lot of these teams in, and it could kind of look like an SEC kind of playoff there to some degree. And that was all of them there. A&M, Georgia, Ole Miss, Bama. Those are probably locks, right? Unless Auburn, of course, loses. And then Oklahoma could potentially get in, and then Vandy could potentially get into the playoff. That was, I don't know why I thought there was one more. But Vandy's probably out, so it's probably going to be 5. And again, if Alabama loses to Auburn, they're obviously out. Oklahoma, if they get upset one of these next 2 weeks, they're also out there as well. But things get really interesting now that Alabama lost that game. And it looks like Texas A&M and Georgia probably going to be the SEC title game here at this point. And speaking of Georgia, how good did they look? They looked awesome. That was kind of our mindset. It was like, well, we need Arch to be spectacular if they're going to lose, but Kirby probably going to at home, right? You don't go into Athens and beat Kirby unless you're Alabama, right? That just doesn't happen. They played excellent in the game. The quarterback played well. The defense, we were talking about during the week last week where it's like, well, the defense for Georgia, that's kind of been the calling card for Kirby Smart for such a long time. Not the case this year. In fact, their offense is actually better than their defense this year. Well, that defense came to play. That offensive line for Texas has some issues. I didn't think Arch played that bad in the game. Obviously, hardly scored any points. That's not good, but I thought he made some tough throws. I think he's progressed as the year's gone on. Did he play as well as he did against Vandy? No. Did he still, make some mistakes? Yes. But I think he could have played the game of his life, and it wouldn't have been enough to beat Georgia in this spot. So I don't have a ton to say about Arch's performance. Thought it was fine. Wasn't exceptional, obviously, but I think it was certainly above average. And he just didn't have any help around him. The protection was horrible all night. And then got to give Kirby a lot of credit. That onside kick, in that spot. Sark apparently said it during the week, like they're going to pull something on us at some point. We got to be ready for it. Well, they weren't ready for it, and that was executed there to perfection from Georgia. So, getting late in the year here, and Kirby's team starting to peak. That's what all the great teams do, and they've been challenged. They know what it's like to face adversity, right? The Florida game they played was really tough. The Tennessee game they played was really tough. The Alabama game obviously was tough, and they lost. I said going into the week that Georgia's going to lose at some point. I still kind of feel like that, but if you said, no, they're going to win these next 2 games and go in and beat A&M in the title game, I would say, you know what, you might be right. So I'm starting to get a little bit higher on Georgia, especially the way that defense played, because the defense has been bad. Now all of a sudden you play more like a Georgia-style defense, you could be in a spot here to have some success. So that's the biggest takeaway from the week for me is, you know what, Georgia's back to – I'm not going to say they're back to being Georgia, but they're back to being a problem. And they're certainly going to skyrocket up the rankings. We'll see. I'll probably still have, Indiana at 2. What do you do with A&M, right? That's kind of talking about that earlier where it's like, well, that's an unbelievable win, but what the heck happened in the first half? And that's certainly something to monitor there as well. You see, as we mentioned, they lose to Arizona. Unfortunately, Scott Satterfield the past couple of weeks has, kind of like last year, right, where they lost a lot of games down the stretch. Be interesting. Should be a good game against BYU. Still a lot to play for. Obviously, out of the playoffs, not going to make the conference championship game here at this point. But getting an eighth win here would be big against a good team. Obviously, in BYU, it's going to be a good environment there at Nippert. And we'll see if they can respond. Bearcat basketball, obviously, they play on Friday against Louisville, 6:30, Heritage Bank. Looking forward to that. That's going to be awesome. But obviously, lots of concerns with how they performed against Mount St. Mary's there yesterday. I know a lot of Bengals fans aren't really paying attention to that, but not good, right, as they were down 6 at halftime against a team like that in Mount St. Mary's. So, we'll preview that game with Louisville. We'll talk about it throughout the week there as well. We'll also try to get some guests on this week. That is the plan. Hopefully get some people on the Bengals beat to come on. They can dissect that game against Pittsburgh. They can tell us, all the things that went wrong, obviously, in that game and turn the page a little bit because, unfortunately, it now becomes mock draft season for the Cincinnati Bengals, and that obviously is not ideal. I hate doing this at this time of the year, right? It's not even December 1st, and we're sitting here talking about mock drafts. But, I don't know. I think the Bengals – right now the projections are like a 9th overall pick. If they continue to lose, I think a top 5 pick is not out of the realm of possibilities. And then I think you can start really throwing around names like Caleb Downs and potentially even Arvell Reese there as well. And if one of those 2 guys is available when you're picking, you take him and you don't think twice about it. But unfortunately, we're going to be doing lots of mock drafts and lots of mock draft talk and lots of draft conversation, which is fun when you're doing it in February and March. Not so much when you're doing it in November, but we'll have plenty of conversation about that there as well. Bengals lose. Again, score looks a lot worse than it really was, but let's be honest here, it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all for Cincinnati, and maybe they have a miracle run in them, but I certainly wouldn't count on it for the way this defense is and just the unfortunate realities of where they're at as an organization here at this point. Plenty of talk throughout the rest of the week. Zach Taylor, didn't really spend a ton of time on him, but we'll certainly revisit him. Duke Tobin, we'll probably have the Burrow conversation again. My stance has not changed, but I'm sure there's some people out there that after the Pittsburgh game are like, you know what, never mind. I do not want to see Joe Burrow, but obviously that's not going to happen. I think it's only a matter of time before he graces the field once again for the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't know if this week is out of the realm of possibilities, just saying. Wouldn't count on it, as he didn't even do any 11-on-11 stuff. Wouldn't shock me, though. And I think Thanksgiving probably still very much in play at this point for Burrow, but we'll see. I did see a report where it's like, well, the mobility is not going to be good. Well, then that means he's not fully healthy. That means he's not fully ready to go. Then my stance changes a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see when the reports come out of, oh yeah, he's going to play, but he's not close to 100%. That would be an issue. I don't think Cincinnati would make that mistake, but I did see something about that, about being a mobility issue, which, look, if he can't go out there and he can't move around, then he shouldn't be playing. But if he's clear, he should. Bengals lose once again, and looking forward to plenty more conversations here throughout the rest of the week. That was relatively optimistic, right? I think, look, you got to say it how it is with this Bengals team, but it wasn't maybe as dark and gloomy as I anticipated coming in. But Bengals lose once again. We'll talk about it more throughout the week. Plenty of exciting stuff, though. We'll talk Bearcat basketball a lot. Looking forward to some good guests here this week. And keeping the conversation rolling here in another week now. We started this thing on September 8th. Here we are halfway through November. That certainly is exciting. We appreciate everybody joining us along the ride, and we're looking to, a big-time future here as we continue to do our show. We appreciate you all, as always. And until tomorrow, take care, everybody.